Hey, what's up, guys? So I just finished watching the whole walkthrough for the campaign on Black Ops 3, and I gotta tell you, that spoiler alert, if you do not want anything spoiled, just click out the video right now because I'm gonna talk about the whole thing and explain it. But my first reaction is that was very sad. Like, literally, I started tearing up a little bit after that game. I don't know why. But it's not just after I finished watching the video, it's because after I figured out what the game was actually about. So first I'm going to talk about the storyline of the campaign, and then I'm going to explain it because there's a second thing about it. So it starts out that you start out with your player, who's just referred to during the game as player, and you're hanging out with your buddy Hendrix, and what happens is you're trying to free this one doctor guy, and you're trying to free this one guy in Ethiopia, and meanwhile, this one guy, Kaleem or something like that, I think his name. It's either Kaleem or Salim. No, it's Kaleem. Yeah, there's a soldier, his name is Kaleem. They're hostage, but your orders are to just extract the doctor guy. But meanwhile, you convince Hendrix that, hey, we should rescue this guy too, so you decide to do that. And then as you're starting to begin your escape, you get surrounded by a bunch of enemies, but then Hendrix's buddy Taylor, he and his crew end up killing all the robots, so that way you and Hendrix can continue to move on and all that. So it goes well. The mission gets compromised. Taylor's team goes back to save the rest of the hostages. But then as you make your escape, the player gets knocked out, and then a robot shows up and starts dislocating, starts beating the shit out of the player. Like, he removes the wrist from his body, like both wrists, and then he breaks your right leg. And then Taylor ends up finding your body, and then not long after that, the player becomes a candidate for this new procedure in which they install a DNI, a direct neural interface, inside your head. And what that's supposed to do is that's supposed to give you the ability to control robots, hack systems, and weaponry and all that. And so what happens is the whole time during the procedure, Taylor and his crew are taking you through a training exercise in which they help you get used to your new DNI. And then not long after you complete the training, you wake up and Hendrix is like, hey, I'll see you on the other side. I'm going to get this too. So the player is going to be facing life-threatening injuries, so he's not going to be able to stay the same. He's going to have so this DNI thing is what's keeping him alive, pretty much. And even though Hendrix is completely fine, he decides that even though I think this is just morally wrong, I'm going to go ahead and go with it anyway, just because everyone else seems to be doing it. So they go through with it, and then not long afterwards, they go to Singapore, find out that, hey, Taylor's team has been killing some people once they're there and all that. And then they start coming across this one issue, noticing that, hey, Taylor's must be a bad guy after all. He's killing all these people and all that. And while in Singapore, you discover something wrong, that apparently Taylor's DNI is corrupted or something, and that he's being controlled to do all this bad stuff, and so is his team. And then you slowly throughout the campaign learn from everybody how that happens, and they keep talking about how to imagine yourself in this frozen forest which doesn't exist. It's all an illusion. But pretty much what originated this whole condition they have is this virus called Corvus, and the CIA at the Singapore station conducted an experiment long before in which their test subjects were given this DNI thing, but somehow it got messed up, and the experiment resulted in this virus gaining consciousness, and then it took in all the emotional pain that all these people were facing, and then it decided, hey, I'm just going to go batshit crazy and end up trying to screw everything up. So what happened was it attacked all these people and ended up causing a disaster in which Nova 6, you remember the biochemical weapon from Black Ops 1, ended up killing 300,000 people in Singapore. And then not long after that, Taylor's team arrives to investigate the thing, and then that's when their DNI gets corrupted, because as they tried to like scan the whole place and all that, the virus then latches onto them, so it has a host, and Taylor just kind of shook it off. It's like, oh, that hurt, and then one by one it began to spread to each and every one of the team members, because they were like, oh, let me see what's wrong with you. So they would put their hand up to them, and they're like, oh, no, I got it, you know. So the player and Hendrix, they end up killing Diaz, who goes crazy as soon as player and Hendrix show up to check out the place. And then that's when Hendrix gets infected, because he tries to scan Diaz's head and finds out what's going on. Later on, Dr. Salim, a guy who was one of the survivors of the incident, he knew about the whole, he knew a lot of stuff about the whole experiment. So while in Egypt, player and Hendrix go in to investigate him and interrogate him and all that, and ask him why, like, what was the purpose of it? Was the was the frozen forest and all that? And then what happens is it results in more enemy forces attacking the area, and then Taylor's team ends up showing up, kidnaps the doctor, and leaves, while Hendrix and the player are fighting on the ground. Meanwhile, the infection continues to spread throughout Hendrix's body. And then later on, they confront another one of Taylor's teammates named Hall. And after a brief encounter in which she dies, the player decides to scan her mind and see what's going on inside of her. And then that's when the player begins to realize what this infection's doing and everything. But consequently, what ended up happening because of this is, by scanning Hall's mind and all that, he allowed the infection to go inside of him. But the whole time that Hendrix and the player are working, there's a CIA operative who's been helping out with them. Has been running diagnostics on them to see how they're doing and all that. Her name is Kane, and she figures out, like, hey, this infection's like really spreading inside of them. They need to control their emotions and all of this. But throughout the campaign, you see that the player is starting to bond a little bit with Kane. Nothing happens though, but I just thought I'd include that in there. So later on, it keeps going on. Moretti becomes the next host. He goes batshit crazy, and then after being affected by this whole infection, the player ends up killing him out of rage. So Moretti dies, and Taylor becomes the primary host again. And then when they track him down to this Lotus Hotel, and he goes crazy, Hendrix stays behind to fight all these zombies while the player runs up to the roof to stop Taylor from leaving in this mothership. And the whole time, the player's arguing with Taylor, saying, hey, you gotta cut this out, man. This is not you. You're being controlled by this virus and all that. So what happens is Taylor's thing gets shot down, and then the player's arm gets impaled. It's a robotic arm. it gets impaled against the ground, so he can't like escape or leave or anything. And then Taylor gets out of the plane, and then he's like, I know what I gotta do. I gotta set myself free. So then he regains consciousness of himself for once, and he takes a knife, cuts into his skull, rips out the DNI, so he actually does something good, and then he throws it on the ground. But because he disconnected his ability to connect with Corvus, the host became Hendrix because he was next infected. So Hendrix shows up, and then what happens is he ends up, as Taylor's lying there bleeding out next to the player, Hendrix shows up and just caps one right in Taylor's head and then leaves because he's infected by Corvus. So what happens is Kane eventually shows up after Hendrix is gone, or helps the player get back in the game and all that. So he's finally back on the battlefield fighting once again. And then they eventually show up to Zurich to at the whatever it's called, Coalescence headquarters, to stop Hendrix once and for all. But after trying to override the security controls, Kane ends up getting tricked by Corvus, even though she doesn't have a DNI. The player determined that there's like a way to shut down, or to like mess with the system. So Kane ends up going to this one room in which it locks down, and she gets gassed by Nova 6, so she's dead. So the player, out of rage, shows up into another room in which Hendrix has the last survivor of the incident in custody. So Hendrix kills the guy, and then the player kills Hendrix, and then the player, realizing, hey, now Corvus is going to attack me, he attempts to commit suicide, but then it goes wrong, and he ends up getting pulled into the illusionary frozen forest deal again, in which it's a battle for his life. And after fighting and discovering that Taylor's memories right there with him, helping him through it, the player manages to purge a system in which his DNI is going to go away. And then after the purging goes down once and for all, he defeats Corvus. It's all gone, but he runs into a Zurich officer who asks him to say his name, and because his DNI is gone and everything, he just says Taylor. Okay, but that's the end of the campaign. Now, actually explain the whole story. The DNI thing, everything that involved the DNI, pretty much the whole campaign story thing never took place. Instead, what happened was the player actually died after the Ethiopian incident, in which they rescue the Khalil guy and that one doctor guy. He was actually going to go through the DNI surgery, but he died midway, so he never woke up. Instead, he experienced everything from Taylor's perspective of the whole campaign was actually from Taylor's perspective, but instead of the people that were in the game, it was different people. Kane was still there, but Taylor was actually dating Kane at the time, and pretty much where this story takes off is everything happens, the Nova 6 incident and all this. Nobody has a DNI, but this one guy betrays Hendrix and Taylor. Hendrix was the leader of the group at the time, so that's why you hear reference to this at the Ethiopian thing. So pretty much everything that actually happened occurs before the events of the first campaign mission. That was the only mission that actually happened during the game.